first of all, I would like to thank you for accepting this invitation. And the reason that we contacted you, that we were passive listeners of the webinar with Monroe Price and Hegedűs and Miklós Sükös and yourself, and some of your comments are very much in line with the aim of this foundation that we launched a few years ago. And so thank you again. And because it will be recorded, I would like to introduce you. So you are a senior lecturer at Loughborough University and professor at the Communication and Media Studies, and also you leader of several research projects. And one of the most interesting that might come up in our conversation, you are one of the principal leaders of a project about the illiberal turn in Central and Eastern Europe. And this is, of course, one of the most pressing topic these days. And unfortunately, this whole illiberal wave found its leaders or self-appointed leader in my home country, Hungary, Mr. Orbán, who once was, as a young person, was a liberal and a freedom fighter, and now he's on his way to establish a quite autocratic system, which he proudly calls illiberal. Would you like to add something for our viewers about your background?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. It's a privilege and pleasure to talk to you about these issues, which, as you mentioned, are at the very heart of my research interests. The project that you mentioned that I'm currently leading is called the Illiberal Turn: News Consumption, Polarization, and Democracy in Central and Eastern Europe. So that's what we are looking at. How does the news consumption influence the patterns of illiberalism, especially with regards to people's political attitudes and beliefs? And we are looking at 4 different countries: Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Serbia for the purpose. And we are reaching the final stage of the project, where we are collating the evidence and analyzing the data and writing our final reports. So hopefully soon people will be able to get more in-depth insights into what we have come up with, and we will also provide some hopefully recommendations on what to do with these troublesome developments in our countries affected by this wave of illiberalism, as you mentioned.
Okay, the first question, which you briefly mentioned in that webinar or online roundtable, is about public media. Would you agree with the presumption that these days media, social or public or private, printed or television, plays a very, very central, very key role in forming public opinion more than ever? And the second presumption is that there has to be a revival of of a public media, which is inevitably outside of the market, of the free market, which is, for the first glance sounds or looks strange, but somehow experiences show that with the fake news and the Gleichschaltung of the major media outlets, somehow in small countries there is almost no way to fight a mass manipulation of people.
Well, I think that the first thesis that you have presented is very much uncontested and agreed upon by scholars and commentators, namely that we live in an age of mediated political communication. Most people receive their information about the world and especially about politics from the media, and increasingly from digital and social media. That's where we see the current trend going. So the turn towards political communication that is ever increasingly and even primarily for some age groups happening in the sphere of digital and social media. So the importance of mediated communication has clearly never been higher. But I would also agree with the second assumption that there are several good reasons why we need public service media today, perhaps more than ever. First of all, the Western democracies, as we know, have been going through a very volatile period, experiencing the rise of populism and facing the crisis of trust and legitimacy. And there are many scholars suggesting that the populist turn over the last several years has been to a significant extent aided by these changes to our information ecosystem, particularly the increasing role of social and digital media in people's news diets. And that's what the populist actors have been able to take advantage of. Then, of course, the pandemic came earlier this year, which brought about not just an unprecedented challenge to the healthcare systems, but also a challenge to our information systems, as we have been very quickly flooded with a huge wave of disinformation, as the WHO called it, the infodemic. And again, that wave of disinformation has mostly been occurring on and through digital and social media, but also it was, of course, substantially amplified by the mainstream media too. But the pandemic, for all the damage and disruption that it has caused, has also made people to look for trustworthy sources of information. And we know from research I have participated in as well, that during the pandemic, there was a substantial increase in the consumption of news in general, but specifically the news from quality sources, including public service television. Across, as I said, across Europe, across most European countries, we have seen this data evidencing the increased interest as well as trust to public service television. Unfortunately, Hungary was among the exceptions where we didn't see the same pattern repeat as in most other European countries. So this is a sort of a testimony to the unique role of the institution of public service broadcasting, a source of information that people should be able to turn to because they can trust information which will be factually correct and at the same time politically impartial. So there is the pandemic and infodemic, which made the importance of reliable professional source of information much more urgent. But obviously, when the pandemic is over, hopefully soon, hopefully another year or so, there will still be these deeper problems that are associated with this new digital information environment, and those problems will not disappear. So that highlights again the need to establish or to support the role of public service television or public service media in general, obviously, across the countries, especially in those where this institution has been struggling both financially and politically.
I would like to ask you to help to understand the paradox, which for my generation is a real difficulty. That, you know, the way we grew up, there was only one media, and the only alternative was maybe the Radio Free Europe. And when you hear anything central or public or state, you get the goosebumps, you know, because it was the Pravda wrote whatever wrote, then the Hungarian party paper, the Népszabadság, and I guess the Czechoslovakian, I don't know what was that, Lidové Noviny or whatever.
Rude Pravo.
Rude Pravo, that's right. Then they just repeated that, and if you really wanted to know what happened, you listen to Radio Free Europe. And now we are coming to the conclusion that you wouldn't need, and you know, we believed when you know, things turn to freedom and democracy, that the market will solve everything. The market is the magic recipe, and somehow it didn't solve much, and probably more fake and distorted information floating around than ever, and people believe in you know, now, you know, there are probably even people who believe that the globe is not round but flat or whatever. So it is an interesting paradox that you wanted to get away and have a pluralistic media market, and somehow the outcome is at least very mixed. The result is very mixed. So this is a paradox that you know, you had to come to this understanding in many areas, that somehow market doesn't solve reliable information, doesn't save the environment, doesn't provide resources for good quality education, the medical system, or culture. So somehow you looking for a more active interventional role of something central, let's say a state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously, we cannot rely solely upon the market to you know, fulfill the kind of expectations that we have from the media, especially when it comes to a current situation and the influx of disinformation, as well as the attempts by governments and oligarchs and other actors to capture the independent media. That's something that market in itself cannot fully resolve or protect the media from. But I would like to also mention another problem that we have currently with the market, with the state of the market, with regards to the news media industries, namely the huge economic crisis that news media are undergoing at the moment, and have been affected by ever since some 10 years ago, with obviously first the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, but then increasingly with the rise of the internet and the shift of advertising resources towards the digital platforms. And as we know, the biggest benefactors from this trend are the global giants, Google and Facebook, who simply swallow vast majority of digital advertising resources. So there's nothing or very little left for the legacy professional media, and yeah, they form basically a digital oligopoly or duopoly. So these are trends which are very worrisome, and obviously whenever there is such an economic crisis or long-standing financial difficulties for the media and journalists become vulnerable to these pressures, political pressures, advertising pressures from rich businessmen who want to instrumentalize these media outlets for their own private business or political goals. So there's all sorts of dangers and risks stemming from the market in general. I would still defend the argument that a well-functioning democracy needs a pluralistic media market, pluralistic sources of information. But obviously, there has to be a regulatory element, a functioning regulatory element present and directed by the state that makes this possible. And yes, as mentioned, if there are no or very limited economic resources stemming from the market at the moment, then the state needs to step in and fulfill this role. And the institution of public service broadcasting is clearly one such solution, one such tool. Unfortunately, as we have been seeing in many Eastern European countries in particular, it is precisely the institution of public service broadcasting that has been attacked among the first institutions on this journey towards illiberalism. So that's what happened in Hungary after Orbán took power in 2010. That's what happened in Poland right after the Law and Justice Party took power in 2015. And that's what we are unfortunately witnessing right now in the Czech Republic, in my home country, where there is a systematic attack on the independence of public service media as well. And even more so, I believe, because public service media in the Czech Republic are still very much influential. They have a rather large market share, and they are also quite a trusted institution. As a matter of fact, both the Czech television and Czech radio are among the most trusted media brands in the country. So yeah, these are all the challenges that lie ahead of regulators in many European countries. But obviously, they also should be tackled on the European level, on the level of the European Commission.
This is what I wanted to come to, and you know, you helped me to come to this point that unfortunately, if the public media not only attacked but actually conquered by a government, which happened in Hungary, in Poland, to some extent in other countries, then you know Facebook or Google or Twitter, as controversial as they are, but they are the last resort, and no wonder that in Hungary they want to curtail Facebook and Twitter, whatever, saying that they can intervene with domestic politics or whatever. It's clearly that they know that's the only free information, because very quickly, if a government systematically with a a democratically elected government, but sometimes democratically elected governments, as soon as they elected, they try to build down every features of democracy. And this is not new. This is what Juan Perón did, and some they were always re-elected, but after every election there was less and less democracy left in the country. And this is happening here too, that the public media is completely turned into a propaganda machine, distorting the facts to the extreme. And the commercial media is either killed off, sometimes even journalists are in physical danger, and their families, whatever. But also, big outlets like RTL, the commercial outlets, they make their deal because the government, through controlling the whole country, they can put pressure on companies not to advertise in a certain outlet. So you see it at RTL or whatever commercial we have left, that even in their news program, there is crime and catastrophes, and then I don't know, a ferry boat overturned on Lake Victoria, and a landslide in Malaysia, and a zebra was born with 2 heads in the Singapore Zoo. This kind of news, and then very little European and domestic political news. So it's very easy, especially where in a small country, which are, many of the European countries are small countries. It very easily can escalate to a dramatic situation. And you mentioned in the program that we watched about European public media, and the other presumption which I mentioned when we approached you is that here the EU should have a role to play. You mentioned the pandemic. It would be very, very good to, just for orientation, that there is a source which is impartial, objective, unbiased, that you know that what are the which vaccine, which vaccination is. It is just an example, but the EU regulates the size of the cucumber, and all sorts of things, and does almost nothing with this. And even if you think of world powers, there is Al Jazeera, there is CNN, there is what is the Russian one? Russia Today, or everybody has one except Europe, and we believe, and I really would like to know your opinion, that it should have a reliable European public service media, with, just like in the old days in the Radio Free Europe, which I was the one. We moved the archives from Dornach, from Munich to the CEU, and the radios actually moved to Prague. There is a need for that at the European level, and it probably wouldn't be cheap, but comparing to the cost, let's say Brexit, it probably peanuts to have, because there was also from looking and listening from here, there's a massive amount of misinformation, which was not countered or offset by so people can make an informed decision. So what you think of the feasibility of a European public media which would be available, let's just play with this thought, as a citizen right to every European citizen, with a must carry. Every local transmitter should offer this, and then I decide whether I turn. The decision would be with me whether I push that button or I don't push, but it would be among the offers, and it would be independent from the national government and independent from market too, and European culture, European identity, cohesion, European movie, our common heritage, whatever, but basically a reliable news source.
Well, it's certainly a very bold and ambitious proposal. I just would like to pick up on something that you mentioned during your talk. You mentioned the several broadcasting institutions that fulfill this kind of multinational, transnational role in Europe, like Radio Free Europe, and that is, I think, a sign of times that actually this year, Radio Free Europe announced its return to Hungary, reopening its Hungarian service, and it has also announced its return to Bulgaria earlier. So I think that this is very much indicative of the kind of troubles that these countries and others increasingly are facing when this institution, which has been associated with fighting against the authoritarian regime 30 years ago, is returning back. But the question whether there can be another such multinational, transnational organization, news organization, this time directed or funded by European Union, directed or having some kind of central office, probably in Brussels or wherever. That's, I think, much more complicated one. And we have to also take into account the fate of a similar project in some ways, the project of Euronews, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which also used to have this ambition to become a transnational European news provider, but it has never really took off and never reached that status, and it remains very, very marginal in terms of the reach of the population, and in some countries it's not even available at all anymore. So there are clearly some challenges, some risks when it comes to developing this kind of ambitious project for a completely new European-wide news provider. But I've been thinking about this because it's certainly something worth pursuing as an idea. But what I believe is that this kind of idea of a European-wide public service news provision does not have to have this kind of centralized format. And also for many other reasons, including the ones that you have mentioned already, then that is the kind of ingrained opposition among a large part of the population against anything that they see as state-controlled or government-controlled. There is this kind of tendency by many people to view that as too much of a propaganda. There might be lack of willingness by people to be watching this institution, this broadcaster, or lack of trust by some of the more Eurosceptic leaning parts of the population. But I was thinking maybe there are other ways, maybe smarter or more nuanced ways of how to achieve a similar purpose, and that could include creating or forming some kind of a network of news organizations, probably already existing news organizations, that might simply form some kind of an alliance with the help of the European Union, financial help, obviously, but also help by facilitating communication, distributing know-how, meetings, and so on. And obviously, exchanging journalistic materials and news as such. But it doesn't have to lead to a creation of a completely new structure, completely new organization. Rather, connecting those existing organizations that are trustworthy, that have the public service mission, but maybe even including some that are commercial, generally speaking, but those that might subscribe to this idea of a public service mission or public service remit. And I just to remind the viewers that that's something that we have here in the UK, that there are commercial broadcasters who are called commercial public service broadcasters because they have certain public service remit or mission. That's ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5. Yeah, so they are commercial because they are funded mostly by advertising, but they still are bound by certain rules and subscribing to this general principle of public service. And I think that that's something that could work in many other countries. And so I think it might be more sort of easier and less cumbersome, less troublesome than developing this huge new organizations, which inevitably there would be an opposition against. And also we have to take into consideration the fact that in many countries, sadly ever fewer, but still in quite many countries, public service television fulfills the kind of mission that we expect and has a trust of people. I mentioned already Czech Republic, and I can imagine that the Czech television would be the first one to object the proposal to introduce another public service television European-wide, because it would see it as maybe a competitor. Yeah. In countries like Hungary, absolutely, that would be very much needed. But it is a solution that doesn't probably fit all the countries in the European Union the same way. So I think that we need to find a more nuanced solution. But in general, I fully agree that there has to be much more effort on the side of the European Union and the European Commission in particular to intervene in these markets, to help independent journalism to survive and to flourish. And there are some promising signs already, especially with regards to the digital tax, for example, that is being introduced to finally force the digital platforms to share part of their income from the European markets to give something back. And the question is obviously how to distribute this money in a transparent and fair manner, even including the countries like Hungary. So that's going to be that is a question mark around that. But in general, yes, I think the European Commission has to finally step up to the challenge and realize that it cannot just simply watch what's happening and see those institutions fall prey to the interests of oligarchs and illiberal governments, especially in our countries. So yes, the time is right to do something. Yeah.
I mean, with due respect to Radio Free Europe or Euronews, which is getting better, I have to admit, but Radio Free Europe is a American Congress budget appropriation. If they want to pull the plug, as they did in '89, with good intentions, they said, that's all democracies. We don't need to do this anymore. And that's why, see, you got the archives. They just wanted to dissolve. It's too much. Same thing with Euronews. Their investors, which are, by the way, Russian and Middle Eastern investors, which is pathetic that the only Europe-wide European news thing is not even European owned. Either one, if someone wants to pull the plug, pulls the plug, that's it. But I completely appreciate what you say, that probably you don't have to, I hope I summarize, you don't have to imagine this like a huge headquarter building in another big neo-brutal concrete building in Brussels or in any other European capital, but something like a network of European public service. It doesn't have to, the activity is public service. It doesn't even have to be publicly owned, and they would get a trademark or a guarantee that this is a European reliable whatever. I guess that's what you are saying. But even with that solution, which is very sympathetic to me, because it's more diversified, it gives the chance to local specific needs and whatever, probably different in Czech Republic and Hungary and Portugal, whatever. But still, I think the EU needs to come in with funding, because these independent, critical institutions in every country, if the situation turns bad, they can be starved to death or pushed off the brink in no time, which is unfortunately happening in Hungary, but in other countries too. But I think this idea, what you said, is that to have a network which they can change programs and information, that's even a more modern idea, that the EU would nurture a network of public service, regardless of the ownership. It can be 5 students who get together, and if they reach the level and do a service in a local area, and they would get that trademark or guarantee, they also should get funding, not just a tap on the shoulder, because the media market better than I do, is that you can't survive in Hungary. Most of the outlets were in foreign hands, and when they got there was a sum for which they sold it, and one by one, and as soon as they sold it, it was killed off. The leading Hungarian daily was killed overnight. I mean, the Austrian owner sold it to a strawman of the government, and next day they didn't let in the journalists. Literally, they pulled the plug for every thing, and then that I don't know, 50 years old newspaper just went down the drain. So what European citizens should do to bring this to the public discourse, because I think you who study this illiberal turn, you must agree that this has a paramount importance to counter fake news, especially fake news or anti-European sentiment is generated from public money, from a government, from taxpayers' money. So somehow the EU has to come in with a much more robust role to do this, or you know, a European Citizens Initiative or something which would bring it to the public discourse. Some people mentioned it. Andre Wilkens, Weizsäcker, whoever wrote this. I myself published about this, but it's not in the public discourse. So, what do you think? What Europeans should do to bring this need to the public discourse and to the decision makers?
Well, I think that talking about the European Commission, we have started to see some encouraging signs that the times might be finally changing, and the Commission is finally prepared to enforce accountability when it comes to the democratic process and the key European values, which obviously include media freedom. The publishing of the rule of law report in September was, I think, an important milestone, because it has explicitly criticized Poland and Hungary for failing democratic standards and opening the doors for sanctions. And then there was the decision of the European Council earlier this month about the economic stimulus package being tied to the upholding of the rule of law. So I think that could be a watershed moment. And we just have to press on. So I sort of moved towards the question of the citizens. How can EU citizens help in this process and in putting more pressure on the European institutions, European Commission, to assume on a more active role in upholding standards such as media freedom and independence. So what I was saying was that people first need to be made aware of how the situation is acute in many of these countries, and I don't think enough people are aware still. That's something we know about, but unfortunately, and I speak of first-hand experience, not too many people in the West are really interested in what's going on in Central and Eastern Europe. And so there needs to be some efforts by the Western journalists to inform people in their countries what's going on. So there is more kind of support, political support from these countries to step in and to push the European Commission to help, including providing some financial help. But in general, I think that there are reasons to be mildly and very cautiously optimistic about the prospects of for improvement of journalism and news media in Central and Eastern Europe. I'm talking about some positive examples we have seen in countries like the Czech Republic, but also Poland and even Hungary, for that matter, which we have witnessed over the last several months. I'm talking specifically about the increased number of subscriptions to high quality or independent news outlets. We've seen this by Gazeta Wyborcza, the leading Polish.
That's the main mystic, and the Wyborcza is the etalon of self-financing.
Yeah, and they managed to increase the base of their subscribers by, I don't know exactly, but certainly at least 100,000, perhaps more. And even though they still struggle financially, there is a hope that people are sort of waking up to the importance of the situation, and that they might be willing to support these independent news organizations. We have a small but increasingly influential daily in Czech Republic that was founded only a couple of years ago. It's called Deník N. It was established on the basis of the Slovak news medium of the same name, and they both are basically operating on the basis of subscriptions. And again, there was in last months during the pandemic, there was a very substantial rise in the number of subscribers. Again, highlighting the need for quality information and hopefully also appreciating the independence of these media. And I just wanted to mention the story of Telex, which I'm sure you're familiar with more than I am, perhaps. But it has been encouraging to see such a successful launch of a new online medium following the capture of Index by the government tied actors. So I think there is, and that's something that stems from our project as well, the Illiberal Turn project. We have some data supporting that the fact that people with more liberal and pro-democracy attitudes are more likely to get their information from these independent news, especially online news outlets in Central and Eastern Europe. And yeah, there is a reason to believe that people are becoming alerted and finally recognizing that quality journalism cannot be achieved without their financial support, simply because the market is not functioning well enough, either because it's distorted by the government or because there's no resources given the dominance of Google and Facebook and other actors. So the market is not the solution per se. Public service media has been transformed into the channels of state propaganda in these countries, I mean. So the digital sphere is the only hope, only a resort of resistance as well. So yeah, the EU citizens, both in the East and the West, need to be much more systematically informed about what's going on with the democracy in these countries and with the media. And I think that once there is this political support, it will be easier for the European Commission and the member states to propose and implement some solutions that will inevitably require financial contributions. And as you mentioned it was a very good example, I think, that you compare it to the cost of Brexit. Of course, it might be a substantial investment, but compared to the costs of the damage that is being caused by disinformation, by
120 billion a year or something, whole EU budget.
But also the systematic propaganda campaigns that are being orchestrated by other powers, especially from Russia, and that is clearly aimed at making harm to the European interests and dismantle the European Union in the long term. I think that it's actually part of a security strategy, or should be part of European security strategy to invest in high quality information media that will protect their citizens from these illicit sources and influences.
But I as a closing thought, that I really like your suggestion that these are this independent media outlet. Of course, Gazeta Wyborcza is the biggest, but Hungary has the HVG, the Weekly World Economy, which is was by the way the first such in the whole Soviet bloc. It started in the 80s. It was about economics, world economics, but later it became the shares owned by the journalists. And this is the Telex model, and this is the Magyar Narancs, the Hungarian Orange, or these are small but very important index. It had owners, and as soon as it went over to the government side, it was closed, and Telex struggling now to follow the with subscriptions and some advertisement. But I think what you said, that establishing a Europe-wide network, and of course the EU should not subsidize someone on political basis, that you are liberal or you're not liberal, but as you said, a trademark or a warranty that this is an impartial source of information, objective, ergo it qualifies for funding, European funding, not through national governments, but direct funding from Brussels. I think it would be a very important step to defend Europe and help to the cohesion, which is now in a very dire situation, I believe. And thank you very much for your thoughts.